mind, Scalesy, dirty mind. But then again, I think people who know you well generally would agree with that assessment.
Seriously, you started it.
Anyway, right, we're live anyway, so you got to behave yourself now. Yeah, because other people might be able to hear. Anyway, listen, we're live, everybody. Welcome to Brainfood Live on Air. It's episode 87. We're bringing it to you every Friday, non-stop. I think we're going to make it, Lisa. We're going to make it for about 50 shows this year. Amazing. I think we've missed only 2. And that was for like reasons where we were just away from we meaning me and a random co-host, usually Adam Gordon, as you know. But I think it was because we were both away on some sort of out of the UK before we could actually travel, before all of this type of stuff came down. So we're going to make it. We're going to keep going. We're also going to do the Christmas Day, would you believe, the 25th. What? Yep, we're going to do a Christmas special, so stay tuned for that. Anyway, we're live, so great to have everybody here. Just a quick sound check as usual. For people who are there with us on Crowdcast, can you hear me okay? If so, just please put a comment in and let us know in the chat stream that the audio is okay.
I think it is. Same for me. If you can hear me as well, that would be good.
Yeah, that'll be awesome. We are multicasting, folks, because we're going live on LinkedIn Live. We're going live on Facebook Live, and we're going live on Periscope as well. So what I need people to do on LinkedIn, if you can hear me now, again, just give me a like, a dislike, doesn't matter what it is. Just let me know whether you can hear me okay on that channel, and then we're going to be good to go. Same goes also for guys on Facebook, actually. Give me a thumbs up there or a thumbs down. Again, doesn't matter. Let me know whether you can hear me okay. Okay, cool. We're going to get some comments here, which is as interesting as like a 10-second, 20-second lag behind what I say and what they see. So I wonder whether this is time shifted in some way that we don't actually know. But anyway, there we go. So let's get on with the show. We're super excited today because we've got an amazing show for us. This is talking about HR and TA. How do we build a better relationship? And before we get into it, of course, we need to have a quick word to our sponsors. Our sponsors this week are Daxtra. You know Daxtra, don't you, Lisa?
I do.
Everyone knows Daxtra. They've been around for like decades. Probably one of the first big data type of businesses. And they are sponsoring the show today. So thank you for Daxtra. If you're doing anything with your CV or personnel data and you want to improve it, enrich it, actually help it, make it work for you, Daxtra basically have been the #1 parsing service in the recruitment business for a very long time. So definitely check them out. I've shared the link in the chat stream there, and get speaking to Sergey on that. Okay, cool. So let's get on with the show. Again, part of my excitement is because Adam Gordon has been upgraded yet again, and we bring back Lisa Scales for your second show. So Lisa, thank you for joining us.
I'm not sure about an upgrade. Hi, everyone.
Significant upgrade, I think we can all agree. And Lisa, always great to have you on the show. And we always start off, obviously, by reviewing the newsletter from last week. So the question for you is, did you read the newsletter? And if so, what was interesting?
So I did read, in part, the newsletter.
In part, I love the caveat.
Yeah, no. So
I did. Politician, couldn't she?
I did read. And I suppose that's the thing, and about the newsletter. The way that it's laid out, you've got headlines, and some things pique my interest more than others. And probably I should expand my own mind by just clicking on things that maybe don't interest me. I might learn something. But actually, from my perspective, I was quite interested in the LinkedIn video intros. Introduction. That's quite a hot potato and quite an interesting move by LinkedIn as a platform.
Yep.
So good to talk about that. And similarly, I thought Rachel Graham wrote a brilliantly honest and quite provocative article about D&I, about it not being a policy, about being a process. And and it's about behavior and culture, not about trying to shoehorn something into a policy so that you end up with tokenism. So those were the two ones that really sparked my mind. And I don't know whether it's just because from a D&I perspective, that's something that's one of our big priorities in our business. So it's going to attract me more than others.
She mentioned something really interesting in that post, by the way, which I disagree with, as a matter of fact, but that's irrelevant. But she basically said one of the ways in which you could improve your metrics, so to speak, is to universalize the sort of the process. So in other words, irrespective of whether this is your best mate or just a random person who's applied to a job, they have to go through the set process that you've laid out. Now, she made a very strong case that way. I personally disagree with that because I think you need to differentiate the process according to your prior relationship with the person. That's actually really important.
Okay, that's quite an interesting point you're making there, because I'm not sure I agree with you in the sense of
no one agrees with me. My neck is like stuck right out there. You know what I mean?
I think there is an attraction piece in the sense of how do you engage with a network, and how do you, and if we're taking a D&I lens, then don't engage with your network. Go and engage with somebody else's network, because your network will be full. Mine will be full of white middle-aged women that probably live in North Yorkshire, to be honest. Whereas, your network might be different to mine. And actually, if we're trying to create some diversity in a business, then, you're not going to get a diverse population if you're not going to go out of your normal networks. So from an attraction point of view, I totally get that. But in terms of an equitable and fair hiring process, I totally agree with Rachel. So whether you are, because basically what you're talking about is the old boys club.
No, I'm talking about the mechanism that work for the old boys club could be used to make it work for the underrepresented.
But I absolutely agree with that. But then you're really going into tokenism there. So then you're going into a positive sort of discrimination piece, whereas actually put everybody in a level playing field, and then there's no recourse, and you can sleep in your bed at night.
Right. I mean, I think most people would agree with you on this, Lisa. So let me. I
don't know. Let's ask people.
I do. Do you think? All right, everybody. Do you believe that a recruitment process should be universal, or should it be, customized according to sort of the individual person that comes through based on what you know before? Just please let me know. I'm happy to be kind of flying the flag as a solo bachelor here. I do think that most people would agree with you, Lisa. But I've got a theory as to why that's not necessarily the best thing. And it's predominantly because there is no such thing as like a fair process that is equitable for everybody, because how you've set it up is ultimately going to favor certain types of people over than others. So for instance, let's say my approach would be, we're going to do a first stage interview. Well, that's all well and good, but a first stage interview might be very intimidating for someone who's not very good face-to-face, for instance. And if the job doesn't require for that person to be in a face-to-face scenario, why would you actually have a universal system there? You need to vary it, I would say, based on what the job requirements are.
Yeah, and that's fine. But okay. So we're talking about there's a bit of a nuance here.
Thank you, Vicky. Thank you, Radina.
Let's just talk about that nuance in the sense of talking about customization and talking about universal. So there doesn't have to be a universal process that is a blanket process across every single role in your organization, where you can, on a per role basis, and go, what would be the best process for this particular job? So therefore, you're getting you're bringing in some fairness based on the job requirement, not unfairness based on the person coming into the process. Does that make sense? So we're not just going to say, look, every single role in our business, you have a first stage interview, you have a second stage interview, and then we're going to chain you to a chair and poke you until submission. What we're going to say to you is based on that customer facing retail role, you might have a very different process to that category brand manager role at a senior level. So I'm happy for an adaptation of selection process, but it has to be equitable and fair for all.
Let me say this. I think I've confused the situation by introducing variance in role there, haven't I? So let me accept your correction on that. I do agree with you on this, but I'll stick my neck even further out because you know what?
Okay.
There's only two people that have commented against in support of you, Lisa.
I know there's like 119 people, and 2 people have commented. We genuinely, actually, I'm interested in this in the sense of there is a nuance to it as well.
I'm going to stick my neck even further out because we need more people chopping at it. So come on then. How about it's the same role, right? It's the same role. But I think you should vary it according to the relationship that you have a priori to that person interacting with your business.
Oh, right. So your mates come first. Are you serious?
No, not necessarily first, but you would vary it. For instance, I would actually say you have a stronger recruiting process for someone who you knew well, because you then would be aware of your bias in leaning towards that person. So, for instance, let's say you decide to hire me, Lisa, and you love me, obviously, and you're going to just wave me through this process because you think, yeah, Hung's amazing. No, you need to be aware.
Do you know what I'd do? I'd say I need to stay arm's length from this process, and I will bring a gender balanced panel to interview you in a fair and equitable way.
Right.
So the interesting thing is, actually, I saw something on the news last night, which I appreciate isn't on the newsletter that we're discussing, but it was actually talking about the gaps of young white male men and their BAME counterparts actually from an academic perspective doing well and staying in that category of attainment, whereas actually the graph was showing that there is a real sort of, I suppose, emerging problem for the young white male person in Britain.
No doubt. I mean,
and falling through the cracks.
We see that expressed in the politics. This is, in my opinion, what Brexit is all about. This is basically been quite a long period of percolation. So it starts with education. I think the big thing was when we shifted away from exams and into coursework, and that really changed the gender achievement massively. It just flipped it. Because it turned out that actually there's gender variance in how people are assessed, right? So you've got a universal process. There's another problem with universalism, is that you're marching everyone who may actually have predispositions for success in certain ways. And there was a massive flip. Women with disadvantage prior to doing sort of focusing on exams rather than coursework, and boys were out achieving girls at that point. Then there was a big shift, and there was a straight reversal. Boys are struggling now with the consistency over time, and girls are outperforming. And now, because we have this universal approach to assessment, though, you create these outcomes. So I just wonder on this idea, which everyone is agreeing with you on, by the way. Oh, folks, you're all wrong. That doesn't matter.
It's your show, Hung.
I do think everyone's wrong on it, but it doesn't matter either. It doesn't matter that I'm right, is what I'm saying, because it doesn't go anywhere. But the point of the matter is that when you have this type of system and you produce outcomes that are really unpredictable, one of the ways to ameliorate, in my view, is to really differentiate as much as you can all the way through, and even allow the candidate to start making input in terms of how they would like to be assessed, for instance, which will naturally sort of customize it as we go through. Anyway, off topic, this is another show. We should try and do this one. It'd be really interesting actually to talk about assessments and whether we should universalize or not. That's actually, make a note of it. We'll do it. But actually, we're going to be talking about HR and TA because this is the topic of this show. And it's super interesting because where do we fit together? Historically, I think TA has always been like an emerging part, a subset of HR. And then there was a movement to pop it out into a separate department. And, do we need equivalence there? And now do we actually need to go back and embrace HR? How does it all look? Particularly with this shift to remote and all of these huge changes that have happened in 2020. I think that for us in TA, generally speaking, the path was quite clear. We should be a separate department. We should be equal, this, that, and the other. And then COVID-19 hit, and this huge sort of shift in terms of our thinking about how companies and people need to operate within them. I just wonder whether we need to re-examine some of these things. So before I bring on Robert and Julie, I wanted to just sort of ask you actually, Lisa, because you've obviously worked in TA, but you've worked as vendor side. You've also worked a bit in the HR side as well. So it's not like you're alien to either of these spaces. What's your view as to what is the state of the relationship of HR and TA, and how does it get good? How does it get bad?
Yeah. So in terms of, and purely it's a personal reflection in the sense of the state of HR and TA is variable across so many organizations, where we see that there is a massive chasm between some departments and the way that a HR department is designed and the organizational structure of that department and function. And then in other areas, we see a sort of buffering up against these two disciplines in a really good way, in the sense of there's great relationships based on mutual respect for each other's professions, and actually a real team effort in terms of the different disciplines. So it's an interesting one in the sense of, and it'll be, Julie and Rob are coming on in a minute in terms of their reflections on this. I've seen it work beautifully. I've seen it work badly. And the interesting thing, as I was saying earlier, we all try and put process around stuff and policy around stuff. Actually, this is about relationships, and this is about how you can both help each other to get the same outcomes for your organization. And what we do, I think, do tend to sort of be slightly guilty of in our own sort of worlds is that we spend a lot of time looking at the floor, and actually we need to spend a lot more time looking at the horizon and going, what does the organization need from us? So it's I can't say there's a universal, God, you use that word too much today. I can't say there's a universal, agreement that all HR people are miles away from all TA people. But I think there is stuff that we can do, and there's stuff that we can learn from today that can help that relationship.
Yeah, and actually, if it is down to relationships can be improved, and there's techniques to do that. So I want to explore that as well. It's not just a case of, we just don't have the chemistry. Actually, you can sort of engineer a relationship to turn it around and improve it in the same way you could get a great relationship and crash it into the wall. I mean, totally. you can influence that. So, okay, cool. Let's bring on Robert, and we'll bring on Judy as well, and we'll see what they have got to say on the matter. By the way, folks, if you have any questions for Lisa, Robert, or Julie, please use the ask a question feature at the bottom, and that's where at the bottom of your screen you should see it, and that's basically where you can get hold of we'll go to those questions towards the end of the session. Okay, there is a Julie. I'm not sure whether that's Julie Griggs, but I'm going to take a risk. I hope it's the right Julie. One of these days, the wrong person's going to actually turn up on screen. And it's not happened yet. But when people put their first names in only, and it's a common-ish first name, sometimes, people might just going to get invited. A. Simon might just rock up and he'll be like, what do you want?
So whilst you're just turning on the video for Julie and Rob, there she is. It's the right one.
It's the right Julie.
Hi, Julie.
I don't think she can hear us.
Can you hear us, Julie? So whilst you're sorting that out from a technical perspective, Kobe has asked a question around how do we then increase the candidates who are underrepresented. So this is, we were talking about when somebody's actually been attracted. This is the pre-work, I suppose, in terms of how do we go out and find people that are underrepresented. So if we still fish in the same pools that we've always fished in, we're going to have the same population. And so we have to do our homework. And Kobe, my view is use data and insights to understand where those underrepresented populations exist. And, it may be God forbid, TA has to do something very different to engage with these people. So we are very good at just doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. So my view is go and find where those underrepresented candidates are, depending on your levers as a business. I know that from a Nestle perspective, we are focusing very much on gender balance and ethnicity, and we have to go and engage with those populations where they want to engage and where we can find those sorts of people. So it's not necessarily about when they're in the process, it's about what we can do to attract and really be able to show our brand to people that may not even have it on their eye line. I hope that answers.
I didn't even see where Kobe asked that question, but it was a really resounding answer, Lisa. I think you give very thorough, comprehensive responses.
Are you talking about the fact I waffle?
That's your description. I think that's fine. Julie can hear us now, I think. So, Julie, are you there? Okay, great.
Hey,
great.
Julie.
Hello.
Great to see you, Julie. So Julie, for the people who don't know you, I wonder whether you could quickly just introduce yourself real quick. Who you are and what do you do?
So my background is in HR, but I've worked on the TA side as well. So I've been a TA specialist, and then I've recently moved into HR in the last sort of 5 years or so. So I'm now HRD. Run my own consultancy at the moment, looking at HR and OD, but we also get involved in some TA and employer branding activity as well. So I always feel a sort of bit uniquely privileged in that I've kind of been on both sides of the argument, so I can see it from a TA perspective and I can also see it from a HR perspective as well.
Let's go straight to you on this one then, Julie. What is the biggest beef that HR have with TA?
I'm not sure whether there's a beef as such. I think we're probably both guilty on both sides. Actually, I'm gonna sit on the fence on this one because I think we're both as bad as each other at times. I think HR can be very guilty of throwing TA under the bus. TA can be very guilty of saying that HR don't provide the information they need. So I'm not sure about biggest beef. I think it comes to what Lisa was saying before about individual relationships. And I also think sometimes we need to be mindful that we sometimes have quite a corporate idea about how things are organised in terms of separate TAs, separate recruitment functions. In some organisations, your HR people are your TA people, you know. So I think we have to be mindful as well that sometimes we don't always have the luxury of a TA and an HR function. But I think it's down to relationships, really. I think we only have our issues where things fall between the cracks, I think.
All right, let's talk about these relationships then, because it seems that that's what we want to focus on. And I'm happy with this but I want to get to the point where people can understand, okay, I've got a dysfunctional relationship. Like this person doesn't like me. That's causing problems with how our departments are interacting. What are the things that are evidence to you, both of you, that is a signal of a good relationship between these two departments? And where do you see it as being like, okay, some red flags are starting to emerge here that tell me there's an intervention required? Lisa, go with you on this one first.
Yeah, so I think there's probably three sides to the triangle on this, in the sense of you've got the organisation, you've got HR person, you've got the TA person, and in terms of sort of alarm bells going off is when you probably are a little bit left fielded by the organisation and the HR person was probably completely informed. So that would be an alarm bell that you're being caught on the hop on something that you probably should know about. Now, my view is in that situation, I'd actually be a bit embarrassed because it's actually showing there's a dysfunctional relationship between a colleague in my own function. We shouldn't be airing our dirty laundry to the organisation. That should be done within the department, within the function. And actually, I think it's like any sort of relationship that's got I don't mind some friction in a relationship and a tension, because actually I think sometimes with tension, actually outcomes are better. So I don't want somebody sitting there saying yes, yes, yes all the time. I'd rather there was an open and honest tension and challenge there, but it was based on some mutual respect of your colleague, of their profession, of your experience and everything. So to me, there's a piece around I think we should all be cognizant of developing good relationships. So I would never let a relationship get to a point where there is a problem. So the first minute that I think that there is and generally the problem is based out of something going on. So we talk about chemistry and whatever. There's no work colleagues that you can't get on with. There's different work colleagues that you have different levels and layers with. But similarly, it's about facing into those open and honest conversations. And can we grab a coffee? I've got a couple of things on my mind. So, and the worst thing for me is, and to Julie's point earlier about being thrown under a bus, you don't want that because actually it just makes you look a bit stupid. So, my view is as long as there's no surprises, I'm good with anything.
Okay, so this is a really interesting point. I'm going to rewind it back to one of the first things you said, actually, Lisa, which was if you're aware of sort of some information that's leaked out of the people department and you hear it from outside, that's a sign that's a sign that actually you need to be aligned together. So the information leakage is quite important, isn't it? For the folks that are listening to this, I just want to make a list basically to say, look, here are things to look out for. If you're discovering things on a company-wide Slack channel or something, when in fact it's intimate to the people department and relevant to your business, your particular function, probably that's a sign of a problem and it needs to be investigated as to how that happened and why it was seen to be appropriate.
But it's also cause and effect. So, this is about, it might not even be information leakage. It actually might just be withheld information that would be useful to your job. So that to me is about educating that actually, do you know what? If I'd known about that person who has announced that they want to retire 2 years early, then actually it would have helped me plan and attract a replacement for that person, in a better way than the now reaction, they're leaving next week. So this to me is an education, not this is about ensuring that your colleagues understand the cause and effect of them not doing something.
Yeah, that's right. And I actually read a really interesting post today about how to give feedback in 5 seconds. And I thought, wow, this is interesting because, I struggle with difficult conversations. I'm a bit of a bottler, so how do I give feedback?
I'm pretty good at it.
Yeah, I don't doubt it.
It's usually about 3.
Yeah, it's about stating sort of, firstly, you got to state this happened, state the facts. This happened, this is X. State the impact of X, which is Y. Okay, when you do this happens, and then state the request, which means, can you in future do it like this? Boom, 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 5 seconds. So I thought, okay, maybe conflict resolution is something we should really think about and train within the HR and TA departments. I guess we do get the support if we're moving into management, don't we? But perhaps it's something that we need to elevate higher whenever we think about any kind of employee, because team, you don't have to be a manager to really have for this to be a useful skill to be able to interact with people who you might disagree with or whatever. Go on.
Okay, so question for Julie here. This to me goes into psychological safety in the sense of being open and transparent with feedback with any colleagues. And psychological safety is a bit of a buzz phrase these days, but I'm quite interested in that in terms of cultures of organisations and functions.
I think there's an interesting point here, and I think it sort of relates back to something that we picked up on the other day, which was around the power relationship. I think in terms of HR and in terms of TA and where people feel that they stand within the department. So I think there's something about establishing parameters about who does what, and I think part of that is sometimes when you have that Ulrich model of HR, you've got front-facing HR VPs that feel they are the conduit to the business, and then naturally, because they're out in the business sort of talking to the key stakeholders, it feels like TA sometimes in that model takes a step backwards and almost becomes like an internal service model to the HR VPs that are out in the field. So there's something to be said there about TA being able to stand up for itself and feeling confident enough to not only challenge out in the business with stakeholders, but also challenge internally with the HR team and actually become partners rather than an internal service function to HR. So I think there's sometimes a bit of an interesting power play there.
Julie, I'm gonna step right in here because I really find this a fascinating point to explore a bit further. So you're saying structurally that sometimes does have an impact, because if HR BPs, they're the ones that, hey, we are the ones talking to the business. You don't do that, Mr. TA or Mrs. TA. You just deliver the requirements that I give you. And that may be maybe the first way in which TA formed. I mean, I do think recruitment has always been a subset of HR. We shouldn't deny that. And therefore, it's like a function of a wider department. So it kind of might feel natural that that was the original setup. But you're saying that can actually, we should be aware of those dangers of this if we are involved in this type of structure.
Yeah, I think there's something about having clear accountability about who does what. But I think it's the tension for me, and Lisa might disagree with me, but I think the tension most often happens between the generalist HR and the TA team. It doesn't tend to happen with the OD function. They tend to be able to stand their ground and go out and show their work and show what they do as a business and L&D function. But I think often TA is the function that sometimes does step back behind the BPs, not because they want to, but because that generally happens in organisations. So I think that is an interesting one to look at in terms of how do you build those better working relationships, because it does seem to affect the TA function more than other subsets of HR like reward or whatever. So I don't know what Lisa thinks about that.
Yeah, so this is really interesting, and I don't disagree. And actually, Hung, you just said something a minute ago which I thought was quite, TA being a subset of HR, right? So the construct of the function, TA to me is just a segment of the TA function, as in it's not a subset, because that sort of almost states that it's a little bit of a hanger-on, in the sense of you have OD, you've got reward, you've got business partnering, you've got L&D, you've got case, you've got all these different segments, subsets, whatever you want to call them. And TA always ends up being, I suppose, slightly the poorer cousin. And I wonder, is it because we as an as an industry, we're not particularly scientific in our approach. At the end of the day, metrics wise, we're still looking at them in time to hire. We move at snail's pace in terms of innovation, in terms of how we set ourselves up as a proper strategic partner to the business. And so we fall very naturally into this back foot service provider. Whereas actually, we talk about demand and supply side, and we see ourselves as supply side because we're an operational delivery function within HR. Reward, for example, is an advisory function. HR, BP, business partnering is an advisory function. We don't see ourselves as that because we have advisory and operational delivery of something, a product. So I find it fascinating. We don't do ourselves any good, any sort of, we don't add value to what we're doing because we don't take a more scientific approach to things. So everybody thinks they can do recruitment, by the way. Every business partner, every reward partner, every OD person, they see it as something they can do, and they just choose not to. So, and I think
is that true? Because recruiting is really hard. It's very, very tough. I would have thought, and no disrespect to anybody in other functions of the HR people, when I'm going to be offensive whenever I say, oh, no offense. But I would imagine that TA is probably the hardest one to do, simply because you're wrestling with the external market all the time. And that's the interactions that you get. You don't have those types of interactions when you're doing organizational design or L&D and stuff like this. Obviously, they're all difficult tasks and difficult jobs because they involve relationships, but the relationships are all internal to the business. Whereas TA has got that responsibility not only to be internal with the business, but you're spending half the time, if not more, speaking to people who've got no, relationship with you at all.
So I did. This is just a side point, which I thought about the other day. It is also the only HR function that has outside external competitors telling the business constantly that they can do a better job. So there's no HRBP, business partners out there going, oh, you don't want to take that advice from that internal person, you should speak to me. So we have another dimension to our role, which is an external attraction facing piece. We've got a competitive external piece from third parties. And then we have the internal, how we elevate ourselves. And Lindsay's just made a point about it's down to TA leaders to work with leadership to ensure TA isn't subservient to the business. Totally agree. And it's up to us to elevate it. And we need to stop whinging about being at the top table. That just drives me insane. And sorry, I'm going off on a bit of a rant now. I'll stop.
Can I say one thing as well, just to throw this in there? But I wonder whether, because the operational delivery side of recruitment can run out of control. It's very hard to predict how much effort is going to be required to fill a job. It could, for instance, take you 1 hour to do because you might just get lucky, or it could take 6 months, because you literally have no idea. So you've got this really unpredictable way of forecasting your resources, which is not the case for other departments where you can say, yeah, I got to roll out this plan. It's going to take this amount of time because there's none of these variables. Now, I wonder, this degree of unpredictability might actually damage the ability of TA to be strategic, because you might just be dragged into something that takes a far more time than you ever had planned to get involved with. And before you know it, all you're doing is this operational firefighting because of these unpredictable streams of work that we have. So I don't know what you guys think of that. Is that a valid thing to observe, or?
I think it's part of it. I think because we in TA you are on the delivery side, so anything can crop up that can happen that can drag you off track. But I think it's probably also the same in terms of casework as well. If you're in HR and you look after casework, you can do something that can be sorted out with a quick informal piece of negotiation, or it can be a case that takes a year to resolve because it's something complicated in the organisation. I think I want to go back to something that Lisa said before, actually, about what TA is bringing to the table and the scientific nature of it, if you like, what's behind it. If you're the TA function, the reason why other parts of HR think that they can do what you do is because they just boil it down to the small parts of process. So they say, put an advert up, look at CVs, send CVs to hiring manager, put a bum on a seat. So that is why anybody thinks that they can do recruitment. They don't think about the employer branding, they don't think about the attractiveness piece, they don't think about all that candidate engagement, they just look at the basic parts. If you're the reward function, you're kind of a dark art. You've got your spreadsheets that show you about pension forecasts, you've got your tables that show you about benchmarks in the marketplace that you can bring to the table, and the business is looking at and going, I don't have that knowledge, I couldn't do that. And other parts of HR go, well, I don't know how to, resolve a pension calculation. You've got sort of tangible knowledge, whereas everybody does think that what recruitment is the process. So there is something about the TA team starting to demonstrate to the business about what it is that they do and what the value adds are. So showing how many candidates actually are needed to get to that process, how many people you've spoken to, how you turned around an offer that was going to fall off a cliff, the value that someone's going to bring to the organisation because they're going to bring however much business with them. There's something to be said about elevating that. But I think on the flip side, and as someone's commented, there's something to be said about HR actually championing to the business what TA do and the value that TA do, because it all starts with bringing people into the organisation. So I think, there's both sides. TA needs to kind of show its worth, but I also think HR needs to champion what TA does as well.
And actually, just to a point that you made earlier, a bit of an echo now. Are we all right?
Yeah, you're back. You okay?
Yeah. Sorry. About the accountability piece, and that there needs to be more definite lines of demarcation of where roles start and where roles stop. And somebody's made the point about, being territorial. That's a negative connotation, but there does need to be some contracting between the HRBP, for example, and the TA partner with regards to, where can I bring value to this piece of work that we're doing? and where can you bring value to it? And just to go on to another point about the sort of demand supply side in that operational delivery, my view is that we naturally sit on supply side because of how we execute the delivery of recruitment. But actually, we should be helping to shape the demand side by being in earlier conversations where it's not the HRBP whispering with their business leaders about some plans they've got to acquire a business, sell a business, make redundancies, do whatever. The TA partner needs to be in those conversations. So, they should be closer to their reward colleagues. They should be closer to their OD colleagues, as well as really understanding the construct of what the HRBP's role is in all of this ecosystem that we're talking about. And actually, there's always a big debate about HR capability. I think the same debate happens with TA capability as well. But this definite contracting of what your role is and who's the actor playing the part in a project is key.
So hang on, you're saying we should formalize like an internal SLA, if you like, between the two departments, and to say, look, just to demarcate the responsibilities and understand who does what and how. That's an important thing. You need to elevate it to a formalized thing rather than just...
Yeah. Go on, Julie.
I think it's a professional courtesy thing as well, I think, in terms of getting TA involved in the conversations. If I think about sort of organisational structures and a HRBP out in the business talking to a stakeholder, they wouldn't pick up the conversation about pensions. They would defer it to the reward person because no one wants to get in the middle of that conversation. But I think sometimes for HR people, there's a bit of a temptation that a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. So anybody can do recruitment. So I'll start having the conversation with the stakeholder about recruitment rather than actually referring it back to the TA partner. So I do think there has to be something there about, doesn't have to be written down, doesn't have to be a set of rules, but there has to be something about agreeing the lines of professional courtesy whereby someone says, actually, it's not me that you need to speak to, it's this person. So, and that, it's again back to relationships, really.
And yes, I totally agree. And to your point, Hung, about SLAs, and yes, there can be some expectations of service levels. My worry is that we try and shoehorn everything into a process or a policy or an SLA, which to me starts to almost put something in some train tracks where you lose on the experience and the nuances of those relationships. So, and it's harder to control people and harder to have those, what I would call more grown-up conversations. And this is I'm going back to the capability piece here, grown-up courteous conversations about how you should behave within a relationship and your contracting conversation around that. I don't think needs an SLA, and it doesn't need a policy and doesn't need a process. That should be about how you conduct yourself.
Yeah. So basically, what I want to get, I totally get you. I think you're right. Sometimes we can kind of get to a point where we're relying on the document to do the job, and you're invoking it. That's not going to work, is it? I mean, imagine if I had an agreement and then you breached it, and what do? Treat it like a legal dispute. It's not really going to be conducive to the growth of that relationship. So for the people who are listening in here, though, I was just wondering, there may be a TA person, or maybe even the reverse way, a HR person that is having a real struggle with their partner on the other side. What are the relationship building tips that this person could employ? Let's take the example of the information not flowing directly to the TA person. HRBP is chummy with the rest of the management heads or department heads or whatever, and it's a cascade down from that person rather than across from the business as it perhaps should be. How does the TA person interact with the HRBP to change that situation?
I think it's around just making sure that you have check-ins. I think it's as soon as you start to act as two separate functions within one department, that's when you've kind of lost it, really. You need to make sure that the whole of HR is seen as one HR. So you're having regular check-ins, you know where things are up to, you're passing information freely between each other. And I think what's been helpful in the past in organisations that I've been in, where there's been a slight tension between the two areas, is to have a BP that is the BP that is the champion for talent acquisition. So can actually sort of bridge gaps between the TA team and the rest of the BP team, making sure that people are across what's going on in terms of the organisation and the direction of travel, in terms of workforce planning, etc. But also citing the BPs on recruitment activity. So if you don't have the BPs in your approval chain as a matter of course on your ATS, just pop them in there for information as well, so they know what you're up to, because it goes both ways as well. It's not just about HR helping TA out, but TA helping HR out as well.
Well, there's some process there which I think is really useful. I was just reading actually, because I talked about this on LinkedIn earlier to say, okay, what are your thoughts, folks? And Lena Frage, who's a friend of mine who works in TA in Munich, she just like rolled out to say, look, what you've got to do is to have these daily stand-ups together. So that you don't operate as separate departments, even though your responsibilities might be different and quite discrete at times. The same play is you're there for the same purpose at the end, and you need to have the daily stand-ups. You need to have a weekly team meeting. You need to basically, again, using the term check-in, keep the communication level high, even if your instinct may not be to do that because you're operationally busy. We talked about how it can get out of control. And I can imagine a recruiter out there or a head of TA out there thinking, you can only have 100 conversations a day, let's say. The last thing I want to do is speak to HR again, but actually you need to. And that's obviously one of the key signs. You got to keep the connections very, very high throughout. It's not episodic.
And I think that the contracting piece up front, in terms of you've got some piece of recruitment coming up. This is how we are going to handle this and get this solution for the organisation. So again, I go back to this piece around who's going to do the communication. That you have to come to the table with zero ego on this and say, right, what's our organisational goal? It's to fill that seat based on the fact that that empty seat is costing us X. And actually, we've both got to get to the same solution. How we do that, we need to contract that up front. And I don't think people are obvious enough with that start part of the transaction. I think it lets it run away. And actually, you should really have that early. We're going to have daily check-ins, or every other day, or if I've got some news, I'll let you know and you can speak to X, or I'll go to them directly. So it's purely about communication and behaviours.
Yeah, very interesting. Okay, let's talk about sort of the, because Lindsay again mentioned a very interesting point, shifting to remote. That actually changes the dynamic in many respects, because a lot of the ways in which we're talking about here was let's build relationships, let's do this, let's have a coffee. You mentioned, Lisa, that's all well and good, but hey, maybe our ability to do that now may be fundamentally shifted, particularly if we decide to go remote permanently. Let's imagine you're never in the same building. Suddenly you might be actually physically in different countries even going forward, how distributed we might be. What are the relationship building steps do you think need to take place in an entirely distributed way? Any thoughts on that, you two?
Well, I've had teams that have been geographically distributed, so TA teams that have been across countries or even sort of internationally with HR teams that wrap around that. So it's about kind of replicating what you would be doing in a face-to-face perspective, but just pulling it online. So like we are now, having a weekly check-in that says where we're up to, what's on the horizon for HR, what's on the horizon for TA, having a Slack channel where you put information on there so everybody can catch up. So it's really just about keeping those lines of communication open, and actually if a piece of information that's relevant to another part of HR comes up, just making sure that you inform someone about that, what's happening really. I don't think not being physically present is a barrier to actually having open communication really, because even in the pre-COVID world, we still had sort of geographically distributed teams. So it's just about making sure that you set out how we're going to communicate and make sure that you do follow through and communicate.
Yeah, I mean, there's I deal on a daily basis with a team in Milan. It makes absolutely zero difference to, of course, we're all, you can see what colour my kitchen is. But other than that, there's not a massive difference, and it is hard. Let's be very clear here. It is harder to build relationships online. We know it's exhausting. Our brains are constantly in overdrive, trying to get those cues that we would get in a meeting very, very quickly and very subliminally. So, and I do call it out quite a bit when I'm meeting new stakeholders. I started this role in lockdown, so I'm well aware that. Most of the people that I've built relationships with, I've never met them in real life and probably won't in some degree. And I think that's the thing is leaning into, look, I've got a dog, it might bark, I'm in my kitchen, connection might be a bit bad. We're all in the same boat here. And I don't think we should try and do a replication of our office by the fact that we're all in this situation. And I think that helps to build relationships because you just show you're human.
You know what? That's a really good point. I think one of the ways in which we have learned to become more intimate is that barrier between the professional face and the personal space has collapsed. I mean, everyone is at home and everyone is, generally as they would be without having a facade. So I think there's almost by happenstance, no one designed it this way, but because we didn't have a fully controlled environment, life seeps into the screen, the Zoom call, that's normal. So there's ways in which maybe that intimacy can develop. But I think it is interesting because most of the people who we're still in that era where the people who we're doing Zoom calls with, generally speaking, might be people that we knew before in an in-person scenario. I think you're quite a good example of something that isn't the case because you've been hired and started this year, Lisa. But if you imagine of the overall numbers of people currently employed, most of them have actually been in person. But as we go forward in a more remote only type of way, imagine if that is persistent, it might be we'll have some very new techniques to build relationships that we'll discover where we can't lean on the history of knowing the person previously as an in-person kind of thing.
And the interesting thing is we're spending so much time online, visible online. I had an email from somebody who was actually newer than me in the business the other day that wanted to get some time with me because they've just started. The first thing I did when I got that email was pick up the phone and I just went, "Hi, how are you?" And it just goes a long way to just bridging those gaps rather than wait for that Teams meeting, wait for that slightly awkward, "Oh, who are you?" etc. Just picked up the phone to him and said hi, and I think he was quite surprised he got actually a phone call on his mobile. We're so used to this medium now, and there's other ways you can do it. So I just think we need to mix it up a bit as well.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think there's a certain amount of fatigue, isn't there, about online stuff really, and it's sometimes just a nice relief when someone just sends an email rather than says, "Would you like a Teams call?" Because almost we've sort of become victims of because it's there, let's use it, rather than actually thinking. Actually, before we used to communicate in other ways, as you say, picking up the mobile to someone, just dropping someone an email. It does get a little bit intense at times to keep doing this. I mean, in this medium, it's great. But I don't want necessarily to have a 5-minute conversation with someone every time like this over video. So
Agree.
Yeah, I think again, one of the things we're starting to learn with remote is that we have to be careful about the interrupts that we're giving people and demands. Very interesting. You mentioned as well, Lisa, that the subliminal information that's exchanged on a video call is actually quite different from an in-person situation, and your brain has to work harder to try and figure out exactly what this person means, because they may not mean it. So it might be we do it differently then. I mean, it does have implications on relationship building because it might mean that, for instance, we communicate more in a written way, let's say. I think it's possible to build relationships purely on a written form, even though, you'd like to deepen it with other ways to get to know someone a bit better. maybe there's a way in which we could ritualize it a bit more. We talk about, having sort of regularity, but you fix the call at a certain point, so that it doesn't randomly appear in your diary, or something just doesn't pop in. And we know actually if something pops into your diary without it being sort of you being aware of it, it actually is a huge distraction to what you're thinking, because suddenly your mind is boiling away thinking, oh crap, I've got to speak to this person on something I'm not sure on, or what this is all about, and am I prepared for that, or whatever. And then there's a huge time suck. So yeah, it's quite interesting. We're evolving how we're doing it, and it's interesting to see how TA and HR will interact as we go forward. We're kind of short on time, but I want to touch on one thing before we go, because it's quite an important point, which is this issue of redeploying staff, internal mobility. Who takes ownership of this? What kind of I see this as a potential place where HR and TA could be a partner, but it could potentially be a place where we come into friction also, because talent acquisition, name tells itself, has always been pulling people from external in rather than looking about internal mobility, which traditionally I would imagine has been some other function within HR to do. Now, if we get to the place where actually we want to do more internal mobility generally, move people around, not lock people into a certain career track or a certain job, we want to be sort of available with multiple opportunities over time with this person, so we retain the individual rather than thinking this person needs to sit in that function. Does TA play a role in this? If so, how do we negotiate the ownership of that with HR?
For me, I think that's where it becomes talent management, and for me, that's not something that can be owned by one part of HR. I don't think. I think that's where you have to be multidisciplinary. So I think there's different perspectives that need to come into play there, because if we're talking about geographical mobility, then you need to involve your reward team. If we're talking about developing someone's career, you need to involve your OD team to bridge the gap between where someone is and where they're going to be in the organisation. I think TA has got a strong part in that as well, because it's about how do we make sure that we're reaching out to our internal colleagues as well as we're reaching out to our external colleagues. So I think there's definitely a part to play. So I think for me, this is what internal mobility is, one of the areas where we all need to talk together, put our heads together and work in the talent management space. I don't think one particular function should own that. That's my view.
Yeah, and I agree, Julie. And I think it also depends on how you actually construct that within your organisation. So our internal mobility has sort of tipped from 70-30 ratio last year, 70% external to 30% internal. It's gone to 50 to 50% this year, in terms of 50% of our vacancies are filled by internal people, which was a signal by the business from an engagement point of view that people weren't feeling that they were being offered the opportunities. They were perhaps seeing Nestle opportunities externally that they hadn't been offered. So we implemented open job posting where every role goes internal. And so that sits very much definitely in the recruitment sense. However, once that person's been identified, then there is, obviously wider conversations to have with the business, because essentially you could be in a situation where you're robbing Peter to pay Paul, and actually you need to think about that from a TM perspective, a talent management perspective. So, and then, you bring global mobility and international mobility in, and people come in from an expat perspective. There's a huge amount of, I suppose, rigor that needs to go around that from a reward tax, implication perspective. So I think it depends on the construct of what's going on in your own organisation. The redeployment piece that you mentioned, though, is an interesting one, because it's generally historically, and Julie, if you don't agree, just pipe up. In my view, historically, it has been seen as an outplacement activity that HR buy in. Yeah. If they're going through a redeployment and redundancy program. And my view is what better people are placed to help redeployees get a new role either in the organisation or external to that organisation. That to me is your TA team. So my view is that needs to come closer to TA.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I think often when there's been a big restructure within an organisation and people have been displaced from the organisation, you've often seen that fall into the hands of generalist HR to manage the process, and then often to L&D to support people out of the organisation. And actually, who better to advise on how to do your CV, how to hit the marketplace, what's going on out there than the TA team? So I completely agree. I think TA do need to get more into the conversation around redeployment, definitely, especially as that's such a big thing at the moment. It's unfortunate byproduct of where we are. So yeah,
and that's not to say that L&D don't get involved, because obviously the journey I think we're going on at the moment is with regards to reskilling. We know that we've got skill shortages across our business, and not everybody is going to be able to reskilled. However, that's when you understand that somebody's there that's potentially going to be at risk, and actually what can we do with that person? And that's where I don't believe that we utilise the apprentice levy enough in terms of reskilling people.
Good point, actually.
You know what? It's a really interesting, I think part of the reason why TA doesn't get involved with redeployment is just a sequence of events that typically happens when a company goes into crisis. Which it typically, the first thing to do is to stop hiring. Then it is to think about chopping. And because you stop hiring, because we're very attached to the acquisition aspect of it, we end up actually losing our jobs at that point. So that we're not even in the business to help when other sort of units are getting made redundant as well. So maybe this is something where we've got to educate the business, where TA needs to just have a more longevity in the organization. It needs to be managing the entire life cycle of the person coming into the business and then all the way out and beyond, rather than just thinking purely at the top of that funnel. But yeah, we're learning that as we go. I think we're all kind of figuring out, because we've had this this really strange year, and it's caused us to really revisit and rethink. Okay, cool. Listen, that's about it, everyone. We're out of time, and Lisa's already dropped off the call because she's got other things to do. Julie Griggs, thank you so much for joining us. We've lost you on the video, Lisa. I think you've gone blank on us. But
okay, I'm still here.
Are you here? Disembodied voice, Lisa's okay. No, thank you very much, Julie. Great to have you on. By the way, Robert Hicks, I do apologize for not being able to bring Robert on. He was trying to do so, and unfortunately, we weren't able to do it. But Robert would have been a great guest. I'm sure we'll try and bring him on at another time. And yeah. So thank you, everybody, for watching the show. Lisa Scales, thank you for being a co-host. We will be back next week. I think we're talking about candidate experience in the world of recruitment automation. So in other words, as we try to do more with less, and we're putting bots everywhere, we're automating all these processes, all these things are fabulous. But how do we make sure that we keep the humanity in the process as we put more robots alongside? So that is a not miss type situation. Please be aware of that. Thank you again to our sponsors, Daxtra. If you're looking to do better with your data internally, this is the company you should be using, or at least checking out. We've got a new product actually, which is all about sort of trying to help activate your existing database of candidates with a new taxonomy and a new search sort of function. You should totally check that out. And yeah, we'll be back next week. So if you enjoyed this show, follow the channel. We will see you next week. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Julie. Oh, I lost you. I was about to say thank you very much to Julie and thank you very much to Lisa. And they just bounced. That happens, and that's okay. All right, everyone, have a good weekend. We will see you next week.